Hollywood Do-Over. This is Andrew Williams Jr. Today is June 16th, 2023. This is Conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. And Concordian Conversations on behalf of my good friend and founder of the Center for American Studies at Concord, Stuart Weeks, and special guest Calvin Pearson, founder of Project1619.org, who's busy working on his phone right now, looking at his website, but he will wave.
Caught red-handed there.
So now, Juliet, let's do a Hollywood Do-Over. Ball's in your court. Yeah, you have to go ahead again and go through your video, hello, and then get back off. I know it's dark, but at least let us record you with your smiling, bright smile that lights up the entire room.
All right. Let's try that again.
All right.
Good evening. Good evening. Yes. Good evening, good day, whatever it is that side. My name is Juliet Miabo. This side, it is the evening and we are low-tide. So what we do is when there's no power, we try and keep connectivity on using other devices. So I'm glad to be connected in spite of the dark. Yes, I believe at this stage, I can switch off the video and it's great to see everyone. Everyone is looking nice and bright.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. I'm the head of the Soweto CSI Council. The Soweto CSI's objective and purpose is to ensure that organizations, multinationals, companies, SMMEs, small entrepreneurs, and other community members contribute towards the upliftment of communities. Soweto CSI started in Soweto. Soweto being the biggest township in Africa, it makes sense to start there, but also impacts lives in other townships. As Soweto CSI, we're commemorating June 16. June 16 for us, it's linked to the Soweto uprising, which is actually the foundation of our democracy. Without June 16, 1976, without those uprisings, we would not have had the democracy and the freedom that we ultimately got as a country. So it's a very important day. It is now called, it's no longer called Soweto Day, it is now called Youth Day, recognizing the role of young people that they played in actually turning around and fighting against the apartheid regime. For us, this is very important. Juneteenth is as significant to us as June 16 is, because Juneteenth in the USA represents the end of slavery. And June 16 in South Africa is also about the end of oppression, the end of slavery, because we had our own form of slavery. It was the beginning of the end. So the juxtaposition of the two is very important. And we honor and celebrate along with our brothers and sisters, our African-American brothers and sisters, as they recognize Juneteenth. And we say in the same spirit of recognizing and honoring those people who sacrificed their lives with the June 16 in South Africa, we also recognize the sacrifices that have been made with Juneteenth. So for this reason, we celebrate everything. And we also honor that today is also the International Day of the African Child. So all this makes sense to us in actually building a better Africa from different corners of the world. Thank you so much, Prince Andrew.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Briefly, Hafiz, if you're available, could you give us like maybe a 1-minute intro, and then Carlton, and then we'll pick up with our presentation today. So Hafiz, can you unmute and give us a shout out? If you're still there, let's hear.
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
Sir. All right.
So I'm in Edmonton, Canada.
Okay.
How you doing? Sorry, my appearance is not so polished as yours.
Well, I'm sorry, my smile is not so clear as yours. But go right ahead.
So I've been working on the AI trend. I've set up the AutoAIFoundation.com.
Okay.
We're specializing in autonomous AI. There was a trend that came out after the Chat GPT called AutoGPT,
Right.
This enables the AI to think and start different AI agents with different tasks. That's what we're focused on. So we want to bring the power of autonomous AI thinking to our problem solving.
Congratulations and thank you. And we'll find ways to follow up. We actually, here for the Center for American Studies at Concord, we have an ongoing initiative dealing with cybersecurity. So I think there is a connection there, Hafiz, where we might be able to connect the dot. Carlton Brown, give us your 30-second elevator speech.
Yes, sir, it'll work. Yeah, I'm the Carlton Brown Foundation, first affiliate foundation of Friends of the African Union. You know, also working on economic solutions for the 1.6 billion people of African descent. And we're also responsible for the unification of the signing ceremony in Uganda for Africa and the African diaspora. We are that AI system, Friends of the African Union. We have a 50-year economic plan of 2063 for the African Union, and we also developed a 100-year plan for the African Union. So we're about the unification of the human family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Stuart Sinclair Weeks.
Carlton, thank you for what you shared. And so friends, I'm glad to be with you all. I'm the founder of the Center for American Studies here in Concord. We speak of it as All American Studies. We have centers around the country and around the world. And our work has been based on the original peoples of this land, the native peoples. And our goal is summed up in the words, e pluribus unum, out of many one. So our work is to help encourage, support fellow citizens to realize that our richness and our genius lies in our diversity. That is where we become truly human, when we can recognize our humanity in others. I want to say a few things about where we are, and then I want to offer a question. I'm going to turn to our esteemed guest, Calvin Pearson, who's with us from Hampton, Virginia, and invite him to address the question. And then I'd love to hear from you all as well. The first thing I want to say is my second son, Daniel, married a woman who grew up in Soweto. And due to the sacrifice of her family, she went to an Anglican school, and eventually, I think she was one of the first, if not the first, Black women South African Rhodes Scholars, where my son met her at Oxford. Her name is Sindiso Muzi, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I just...
Would it be Cindy Swa Muzi?
Sindiso, Sindiso. That's how it's at least come over to us in English. And I can send you some information about her. So I don't speak of daughters-in-law, but daughters-in-love. And she's a daughter-in-love, and she has given me 3 half South African grandchildren. So I want to mention that. I also want to send you greetings.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, it's great to hear. We're all connected.
We are.
It's amazing. Yes, thank you.
We are indeed. We are indeed. You're most welcome. And I want to send you greetings on behalf of 2 individuals who Dr. King spoke of as the people that influenced him most greatly. And those are 2 Concordians, Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Civil Disobedience, which inspired not just King, but Gandhi and Tolstoy and Mandela and Chavez and many others. This essay has inspired literally millions upon millions of people. So I was one of Dr. King's first teachers. He studied, as I think people may know, at Boston University here nearby Concord, Massachusetts, where we are. And the second was Ralph Waldo Emerson. And in Dr. King's sermon, Antidotes to Fear, he quoted Emerson, who said, "A person has not learned the lessons of life, who has not each day surmounted a fear." A person has not learned the lessons of life who has not each day surmounted a fear. Emerson also said, friends, we wish to be settled, but our salvation lies in being unsettled, which is a rather unsettling comment. But those who can hang in there with such unsettlement, I think they understand the wisdom of those words. And I'm sorry to say, as one of more of a pale face this time around, the family I was born into goes back to the very beginning, to William Bradford, the governor of the Plymouth colony from the Mayflower, that most of my African American, Native American, Latin American, and other American brothers and sisters live their whole life with this unsettlement, many that I know. And so there are many valuable lessons we can learn from them. But that brings us to where we are today, and we are at the Old North Bridge. I'm going to point the camera. Hopefully you all can see. There's a grave of the British soldiers in front of us. This is where the shot was fired, heard round the world, which began the American Revolution. And then there's a monument here. And then there's the Old North Bridge, and the Minuteman statue. And I want to say a little bit about the history before we come to the Declaration of Independence and a question I have for Calvin and for you all. So those who know the history of America know that Britain was rather tyrannical, and the people left Britain to be free, but Britain followed them to America. And so tensions mounted inevitably, and Concord, which was first the home of the praying Indians, the spirited praying Indians, and then America's first non-native inland community, not a settlement or an outpost, but an actual community above tidewater, then became the crucible of the American Revolution, where the shot was fired, heard round the world. So push, approach, shove, Concord had become a center of resistance. There were munitions, there were armaments stored here, and the British headed out on the evening of the 18th of April to Concord to confiscate the munitions and to give these bloody tearaways a lesson. Longfellow writes, "Listen, my friends, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." Paul Revere didn't make it to Concord, but fortunately Dr. Samuel Prescott, met up with Paul Revere. They were Sons of Liberty in neighboring Lexington. And when Revere and his friend Dawes were captured, Samuel Prescott, who knew the territory well, jumped his horse over a stone wall and brought the message to Concord that the British were coming. And so this fateful event occurred at the Old North Bridge, where a bunch of farmers, primarily farmers and tradesmen, stood down, faced off against the mightiest nation in the world. And the way it happened was the Minutemen were mustering on the hillside. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll point the camera. The hillside, and I'll walk in that direction behind us. And the British had arrived in town, and they had a confrontation in Lexington, but there are no shots fired in Lexington by the Minutemen. They had a difficult, long night marching. They weren't in good spirits. When they arrived in Concord Center, because it was early, the Concord Minutemen, retreated over this bridge. And waiting for other Minutemen from every Middlesex village and farm to muster, so they had enough forces to meet the British. That eventually happened. There were enough numbers on the hillside so that when they saw smoke coming from Concord, Someone said, are we going to let them burn down the town? Well, what was actually happening? The British were cold and they set a fire. They did use some of the furniture of the Concordians, but those at the hillside didn't know what was going on. So they said, are we going to let them burn down the town? And one of the majors said, I have not a man who's afraid to go. And they marched down, and the British retreated over the bridge. They began to pull up the planks, but the Minutemen approached and the British fired on them. And the order for the Minutemen was don't fire unless fired upon. But if this is meant to be a war it will be. And they fired back and British fell, and they basically chased them back to Boston. And they surrounded the city, and George Washington came north. Now, before we go to the Declaration of Independence, I want to pose a question for you all that I think is very, very significant in terms of the untold part of our history. And that is, George Washington came north to assume command of the Continental troops. And early on, for the plane overhead, we're near an Air Force base. Early on in his tenure, a young Negro former slave, poetess, approached his barracks. And the guards were a little surprised that she'd be coming, but she showed them a letter from George Washington. And they were startled, but they honored it. And she was led into Washington's secretary, and she showed him the letter, and she led him in to George Washington. Oh, this is a letter from George Washington to this young Negro former slave poetess, whose name was Phyllis Wheatley. And she was inspired to write a poem to Generalissimo George Washington on behalf of Columbia, the Anglican expression of the spirit of this land. We speak of Washington, D.C. as a district of Columbia. Our first national anthem was Hail Columbia. So in terms of the genius of the spirit of its land, its Anglican facet or guise, I would say, is Columbia. You find other names for the African Americans, for the Native Americans, for the Latin Americans or Mexican Americans. So my question, friends, is how could it be that this Negro former slave, this young woman, could write a letter to George Washington that he not only received, but he was deeply moved. It had a poem and invited her to come and meet with him. He actually invited her to come and meet with him. And in the poem, she actually instructs him. She refers to him as Generalissimo, and she instructs him on behalf of Columbia. So I want to begin there with this question for you all. Any thoughts on how one could explain that? And I'll just add, I see her in my mind's eye being led into Washington's headquarters, into his room. And I see him behind the desk, this large, white, male, Anglo-Saxon Herculean figure arising as this young, slight Negro former slave poetess comes into the room. He rises in front of her. Anybody have any thoughts? I'll invite Calvin as well to join us with this question. Anybody have thoughts how one can explain that? How could such a central part of history come about that a young Negro former slave poetess could instruct Generalissimo Washington on how to proceed in this engagement?
Very, very interesting indeed. It'll be interesting to see how personal and how deep their relationship was. Of course, it should have been informed by other things beyond what is known out there. So it would be interesting to hear what everyone else thinks.
Thank you for your words. Any other comments, friends, from those who are listening?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
You know, I meet people like her, people whose spirit can go out and not only touch a person, but touch the whole world. And to me, those type of people are already chosen to be a light and a guide for others.
Beautiful. Beautifully put. Thank you. And our other friend who's on the call, do you have any thoughts you might share? If you're still with us, before I invite Calvin to offer any thoughts.
No comment. No comment.
So Calvin says he has no comment at this point. We will come to the Declaration of Independence in a minute. I would suggest, friends, that for those who realize that we don't just have a mortal body, but an immortal soul and spirit, and who realizes that spirit doesn't die when we lay down our body, but lives on, that in fact, all the great figures of the ages that I know, from Shakespeare through Booker T. Washington, through Emerson, they all speak of reincarnation, of repeated earthly lives. I would suggest, and I'll be going to this in more detail on Sunday evening, that they were deeply connected in an earlier lifetime. They were taking up a thread. We speak of sleep as a little sister of death. Every night we pass away, every morning we awaken in the new day. That as
However,
walking,
I apologize for interrupting you, Stuart, but today's focus, since you are in fact talking about dealing with the Declaration of Independence and the 13th Amendment and freedom, and I think perhaps this would be a time, since we're here, to address those issues.
Andrew, thank you for the interruption. We're getting there. We're getting there. And it's all related, which is why I'm sharing it. So what I would suggest in the Concordian transcendentalist mode, that as Washington and Wheatley met that day, history recounts that, and they went to sleep that night. And if they met the next day, they would have taken up the thread. I think that is what had happened from an earlier lifetime. But I'll just leave it at that for the moment, because if we can grasp whatever truth there may be in the notion of reincarnation, there's no longer any basis for racism, sexism, anyism. No basis whatsoever. One lifetime white, the next black. One lifetime male, the next female. One lifetime Christian, the next Jewish, whatever. So we're seeking to become whole human beings. So let us move on. So the shot was fired, heard around the world. The revolution began. The revolution was won. And then came the task of constituting this new nation. And that involved a Declaration of Independence. So the question, and this time I'll turn to Calvin first, the question that we are addressing, and I welcome feedback here, and that we'll be going to more deeply on the 4th of July, is what is meant by these words in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. What happened to the women? What happened to those men of darker skin, be it red or black or yellow, brown? What happened? How could one explain these words, all men are created equal? What was being said? Why was it being said? What are we to understand about it? And what might we do about it? And on the 4th of July, we'll be printing a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And we'll have an addendum that will address these questions. So I'm going to pass this phone to Calvin and invite him if he wishes to comment on it. And then everybody else would love to hear your thoughts to this question.
Thank you, Stuart. Again, Calvin Pearson, founder of Project 1619 Incorporated in Hampton, Virginia. To learn more about who we are, what we've done, you can go to project1619.org and learn everything you want to know about the first enslaved Africans, how we changed the history. When we talk about independence, this was a document that has no value to me. When we talk about all men are created equal, if we go back and look at the Confederate Constitution, they said all white men are created equal. But when we go back and we do the official United States, we say all men. And we know that that was not true, because a lot of these people who signed the Declaration of Independence owned slaves. And we know that they had a disdain for their servants. Their servants were property. They were not, a lot of times they didn't even think that they were human. These were property that was treated like animals, no better than the cow or the goat and the chicken. So how can you say all men are created equal when you are in your own reality treating them like property? To me, the Declaration of Independence was a referendum to white people to make them believe that they were superior to everybody else, because that's what they thought. The white man was superior. And that when we start looking at all men are created equal, a lot of people don't understand what the Declaration of Independence was. The Declaration of Independence was a separation of powers between Great Britain and America. We severed that relationship with Great Britain. There was no so-called freedom. When people celebrate the 4th of July, what kind of freedom are you celebrating? When we look at what Frederick Douglass said in his speech, what does the 4th of July mean to the Negro? He was trying to tell Black people and brown people that you out there celebrating the white man's legacy. That if you look at the true story of the Declaration of Independence and the 4th of July, brown and Black people were held in bondage for a number of 89 years. So when brown and Black people sit around the table of this coming 4th of July, I ask them, what are you celebrating? It didn't gain your family any freedom. It didn't set any of your people free. And we got to realize too that this is America's history. People around the world in Africa and Europe, they don't care about the Declaration of Independence. It has no bearing on their life. We here in America, we look at Juneteenth. Juneteenth is our day of Declaration of Independence. Juneteenth is our day of jubilation. Juneteenth is our day of freedom. And I encourage people to acknowledge the past and recognize where you've come from. Recognize what you're celebrating. You need to be celebrating Juneteenth if you're talking about freedom and Independence Day, not the 4th of July, because it had nothing to do with our ancestors. On the 4th of July in 1776, our ancestors was in the cornfield picking vegetables so the white man could have a harvest.
Thank you, Calvin. I hear the letter and the spirit of your words. Thank you. Can we hear any comments from others, friends, on this?
Yes, well, I feel impelled to take up the call, as you know, Stuart, and to let also Juliet know in particular that yes, we do celebrate Juneteenth. And yes, it's called Freedom Day. And yes, it did reflect the freedom of those slaves or those enslaved people in Galveston, Texas on June 19th when they were, quote, freed. However, as others know, there were still states where slavery existed until December 6th of 1865, when the 13th Amendment finally was ratified by the state where I was born, in Georgia. So it's only when Georgia ratified the 13th Amendment on December 6th that those last 200,000 slaves that were not freed on Juneteenth got their freedom. So I do, of course, recognize the symbolic importance of Juneteenth and the fact that President Biden has provided that as a national holiday. Certainly, I uplift the idea that there is a time for celebrating those that were freed. But again, from a historical standpoint, Stuart, I hope we have a chance to address this issue on Sunday night when we talk about how we tell the history. So Carlton Brown, Hafiz, or Juliet, might you have any thoughts?
Yes, I do.
Please share.
I am an extensive study of the 13th Amendment, and it says slavery nor servitude shall exist in the United States unless or except you've been convicted of a crime. So the people are still in slavery because the prison population is over 60%. When we're only 13% of the population, they have millions of people on probation and parole for crimes that don't amount to anything, destroying their whole opportunities at getting good credit and things like that. My chairman has started a movement, Mr. Herschel Daniels Jr., to amend the slavery or servitude in the 13th Amendment and to have it say slavery or servitude shall never exist in the United States or anywhere in its jurisdiction. So I am definitely, that is a part of human rights. And together we can get those things done. There's one thing we can't do. We can't change the past, but we can change the present and the future together.
Well, thank you. Before Juliet or Hafiz says anything, let me ask you, Stuart Sinclair Weeks, with your idea of this amendment on July 4th, how realistic is it for us to carry along at that same time this proposed amendment to the 13th Amendment? Is that something feasible or not, Stuart Sinclair Weeks?
Why would it not be, Andrew?
It was a rhetorical question.
That's my best answer I can get. And twofold. Number one, the Center for American Studies is always open to any suggestions by people of goodwill. And number two, such an amendment is essential.
Well, thank you so much. Hafiz or Juliet, might you have any comments before we go back to whatever programming that Stuart Sinclair Weeks has in mind?
Yes, I have a comment. I'm commenting on the presentation or the submission that, sorry, I missed our brother's name.
Stuart.
The one who spoke. Yes,
Or
Stuart.
Carlton Brown was,
yes, Brown.
and Carlton Brown was the speaker.
Yes, Carlton Brown. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Yes,
just to say that, you know, the sentiment he shared is exactly, it's actually so similar to what we are going through. I can totally and fully identify with what he's saying in terms of where you would have a time or a day where there would have been the victory of democracy, you know, like we have the 27th of April. That's the day when we first got a right to vote. And there we were voting for democracy. Yet we all understand that on that day, we're not voting for freedom. We're not voting for emancipation. So what is, as much as we have days like those, you still have you still have the fact that we are still oppressed economically. We are still oppressed. The system is still set up to work against Black people. We are still facing the consequences of slavery, colonialism, apartheid. So it becomes also a sad time when we are expected to celebrate what we know actually works against us. And days like those tend to actually confuse the history and confuse the and the young generation in terms of, course, it's almost like getting the young generation to celebrate candy without giving them fruit and vegetables and proper nourishment. I'm just using that as an example. So that pain I can fully identify with, and just say that take heart. I think it's the battle is in recognizing the pain it causes and engaging in conversations like this and doing, as our brother said, doing what we can to change the present for a better future, because we have to do our bit to change the present for a better future for all our people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I look forward to me and you establishing a contact, and we can connect you with what we're doing throughout Africa and also South Africa as well. We have FAU South Africa up on friendsoftheafricanunion.com, but you can contact me on FAU Brown, BROWN, FAU, one word, which means Friends of the African Union, and we will get to putting actions and trying to direct funding so that we all can be the change that we need to be for the youth and the future.
Amen to that. Thank you. Prince Andrew, I will rely, because I'm not writing at the moment, I will rely on you for contacts, please, because I'm not able to write. Thank you.
No worries. Also, Carlton, you can, if you want to, type it into the chat so that we'll be able to have it and share it with anyone else. But yes, no problem, Juliet. We're all connected together.
Thank you.
Hafiz, any thoughts on your part? Or back to you, Stuart Sinclair.
Well, I would love to hear from Hafiz if he has anything to offer.
Oh, no, he's no longer with us. And that's so it's just us. But Stuart, I would ask you if you'd be so kind. You have the the Zoom control in your hands. Calvin Pearson is over here with me with the Minuteman statue. So might you be able to walk this way and tell people about what you do on your way, or what is your thoughts about how do we proceed from here, Stuart?
Yeah, well, I think I'll be glad to come over. Friends, I'm a bit of an odd duck, and I'm also something of the fool who enters where angels dare not tread. And I say that because I want to respond to Calvin's moving words. And I speak as one who, though not Black, but white, and colorblind since I was born, has been granted many passages through the depths of the depths. I'm writing a testament called Living Hell, a Veritable Blessing. So this is where this comment comes from. I try, when I think it's open, to offer my best thoughts to others. And I hear and I feel Calvin's pain when he described what he described. I can't experience it as directly as he can because I'm not Black, but I seek to live into it. And what I want to say is not meant as an explanation. I'm not meant as an excuse whatsoever, not whatsoever, but as an explanation, if it has any meaning. And that is, we are imperfect. Baseball players, superstars are paid millions of dollars for striking out, grounding out, flying out 7 times out of 10. And they might get hit by the ball a few times in the process. Once again, superstars in baseball are paid millions of dollars with striking out, grounding out, flying out 7 times out of 10. We are imperfect. And our founding fathers were imperfect. But when Calvin and I've talked about them, I said, do you really feel, Calvin, that Washington and Jefferson and Franklin and Madison were as heartless as one might portray them, having owned slaves? He wasn't, but he paused. He paused. And my point is that ours would be an ever more perfect union. Ours would be an ever more perfect union. It's by no means perfect, but it seems to be, there are many, many people around the world, and not just white people, and many people for whom the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, has deep meaning, even with its fatal and tragic flaws. So this is an experiment. It's an imperfect experiment. And what we're wanting to do with the July 4th printing the Declaration of Independence with the addendum is to share as much as we're able to why this phrase was written, what was behind it, all men are created equal. What was behind it? Was it pure hypocrisy, or was it something else at work? And I think people know that what was at work, unfortunately, was there was a culture in the South, not only in the South, that we're counting on the slave labor. And there's no way that the colonies could have come together if that wasn't accommodated tragically. And Lincoln knew it. And the Civil War came to address it. And he himself, in his second inaugural address, spoke to it. So I'll conclude just with this comment. And that is that when we entertain the notion that we not have just a body, but we have a soul and a spirit, and that spirit lives on, for those who can consider this novel notion of reincarnation, it could be that people back then who were white are today black. People back then who are black are today white. But there may be a larger mystery involved with our humanity. So I'm going to go into that more on Sunday evening when I speak about Phyllis Wheatley and George Washington. And I think their connection in earlier lifetimes in Rome and in Greece. And I don't offer the God's truth, friends, because what do I know? I just offer it as my best thought. So I'm going to pause there, give it back to Andrew. I think we're going to draw this to a conclusion for now, though I welcome any comments. I'm sure Andrew does as well. And then picking up the thread at 8 o'clock this evening, where we'll be speaking with some members of my family from Africa, from Kenya, and from Rwanda, and from Senegal, and from South Africa, who are trying to make a life in America. And we're going to be speaking to them about the problems, challenges, and opportunities. That'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight. So Andrew, back to you, and let's hear any comments that people may have, and then we can pause this session and look ahead to tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And those of you who are here can use the same link to come back again this evening. And probably for the weekend, it is now required that everyone register. If we experience problems, we may have to change it so that there is no registration required. But for tonight, you can use the same link, and you can share that link with anyone else. All of you, I'll send out the registration link. And if you like to have anyone else involved, we're asking you to help build this audience up over these next 4 days to collect together at least those contact emails of people that want to be connected together. When you register, we have your email. So the idea is to follow up and we can work together collaboratively, not just throughout the weekend, but throughout the rest of this International Decade for People of African Descent, the rest of the Sustainable Development Goals, the rest of the African Union Agenda 2063, and the rest of our lives. And with that, I'm going to wind it up unless there are any closing thoughts. Now, time to speak.
I got a closing thought.
Great.
When I was in elementary school, they took me on a field trip, and I got to see Muhammad Ali. So he told me something. A wise man once told me that love for others were the keys to the kingdom of heaven within myself. And if I get lost or fall down or forget, all I have to do is ask an angel, and I'll know him or her when they speak, because it is an action word and something that you do. Thank you.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. And
Wow.
Bill Russell, who was the black center and heart of the world champion Boston Celtics basketball team. This was an integrated team with white and black. He was asked, what was the key of all of your success? Many world championships. He said, we loved one another.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
all.
No, that's very true. Yeah, thank you so much. Because it's only the love that we have for our people, deep-centered love, not pretentious, not linked to anything else, just pure love for wanting to see good for our people, that can actually move us forward and make us want to be the change that we want to see around us. Thank you so much.
God bless you all.
God bless you all. And we're going to wind up this session of conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. and the Center for American Studies at Concord.
Concordian conversation.
Well, you know, we kind of organically grew into what's now known as Andrew Networks. And Stuart Sinclair Weeks is suggesting that we grow organically into the Concordian conversations. So we'll take that under
Both
advisement.
together.
Oh, both together.
Both together.
Both together.
Not apart, both together. The wonderful Andrew Williams Jr. conversations with the Concordian conversations. We're working together, this brother and I.
Obviously. All right, very
Awesome.
good. We're out of here. We'll be back in a couple hours. Love you all.